Prince Darling. Once upon a time, a king was out hunting when a little white rabbit, which his dogs were chasing, sprang into his arms for shelter.
Hey, little fella, don't worry. No one's going to hurt you.
He took it home to his palace and ordered his servants to take good care of it.
I am the Truth Fairy, and it was I who came to your arms as a rabbit for shelter to test if you were merciful and kind. And indeed you are. Ask me for anything you want, and I promise that I will give it to you.
The king was pleased.
Madam, when the time comes, if you will make my newborn son the best of princes, I shall be grateful to you. I want him to be a good, kind, and a merciful king.
Oh, good king. I promise to watch over your son. And if the need ever arises, punish him so that he may correct himself and become a good king as you are.
The king was quite satisfied with his promise.
Put this ring on your son's finger, and I'll always be there to watch over and guide him.
The baby prince was so adorable that no one could help loving him. Hence, he was named Prince Darling. Over the years, Prince Darling grew up to become a handsome lad. One day, when he was sitting beside his father's statue remembering him, his foster brother, Charles, walked in.
What are you doing here, Prince Darling? Don't you know we are to go out hunting?
I remember, brother. It's just that sometimes I miss Father so much.
Prince Darling Charles and his cousin Ron set out to the forest to hunt. While riding, Prince Darling caught sight of a girl. He slowed down while his brothers rode away. He turned his horse towards the direction of the girl and trotted towards her. The young girl was so very pretty that the prince almost immediately fell in love with her. He made up his mind at once that he would marry her. Her name was Celia, and she was as good as she was beautiful.
I've never seen anyone as beautiful as you. I'm going to marry you, and I think you will only be too happy to become a great queen.
Seeing the arrogance of the prince, Celia fearlessly said, "Sire, I am only a shepherdess and a poor girl, but nevertheless, I will not marry you."
Do you dislike me?
"No, sire, you are a very handsome man and a prince too, but it is of no good to me, for I do not wish to spend my life with an arrogant man." The prince was very angry at this speech. At that moment, his soldiers arrived looking for him. He immediately commanded them to make Celia a prisoner and carry her off to his palace. At that moment, the ring pricked him.
Ah!
He tried to remove it from his finger, but failed at doing so. Later that day, when Charles saw him so downcast, he asked what was the matter. And when he explained that he could not bear Celia's bad opinion of him and was resolved to be a better man in order to please her, his evil brother said to him,
You are very kind to trouble yourself about this little girl. If I were you, I would soon make her obey me. Remember that you are a king, and that it would be laughable to see you trying to please a shepherdess who ought to be only too glad to be your wife. Keep her in prison. Punish her.
But would it not be a shame if I had an innocent girl punished? For Celia has done nothing to deserve punishment.
If people will not do as you tell them, they ought to suffer for it. And remember, she's not innocent. She made a mockery of your love for her. She laughed at your love. Laughed.
In saying this, he was able to touch a weak point in his brother's character. For the prince, in quite a furious rage, rushed off to find her. When he reached the room in which Celia had been locked up, he was greatly surprised to find that she was not in it. His anger was terrible, and he vowed vengeance against whoever had helped her to escape.
Celia!
At that moment, the ring pricked him again, and the prince cried out loud,
Ah! How do I get this ring off my finger?
Can we talk about your ring some other time? For we have a great matter at hand that needs your attention.
Charles and Ron told the prince that it was Suleiman, his old tutor, who had helped Celia to escape. They even bribed a guard to say that Suleiman himself had told them about it. The prince, in great anger, sent Charles with a number of soldiers to bring Suleiman before him in chains, like a criminal. After giving this order, he went to his own room, but he had scarcely got into it when there was a clap of thunder which made the ground shake, and the Truth Fairy appeared suddenly before him.
I promised your father to watch over you, and if you were ever to become evil, punish you. Your father was a good man, but you have gone your own evil way. It is time that I should fulfill my promise and begin your punishment. I condemn you to resemble the animals whose ways you have imitated. You have made yourself like the lion by your anger, and like the wolf by your greediness. Like a snake, you have ungratefully turned upon one who was a second father to you. Your churlishness has made you like a bull. Therefore, in your new form, take the appearance of all these animals.
As soon as the Truth Fairy finished, Prince Darling saw to his horror that her words were fulfilled. He had a lion's head, a bull's horns, a wolf's feet, and a snake's body. At the same instant, he found himself in a great forest, beside a clear lake in which he could see plainly the horrible creature he had become, and a voice said to him,
Look carefully at the state to which your wickedness has brought you.
Prince Darling recognized the voice of the fairy Truth, and began to think that the best thing he could do would be to get as far away from the lake as he could, so that he would not be continually reminded of his terrible ugliness. So he ran toward the wood, when he stopped under a tree. A huge cage came down and trapped him, and the hunters who were hiding behind the tree came out. The hunters carried a cage, and they approached the town. He saw that some great rejoicing was being held, and when the hunters asked what had happened, they were told,
The bad prince is dead, and his foster brother and cousin, who tried to seize the kingdom and divide it between them, were fled out of the kingdom by the people.
The man narrated that the people had offered the crown to Suleiman, whom the prince had left in prison.
He is a good and just man, and we shall once more enjoy peace and prosperity, and that is why we are rejoicing.
Prince Darling roared with anger when he heard this, but it was still worse for him when he reached the great square before his own palace. He saw Suleiman seated upon a magnificent throne, and all the people crowded around, wishing him a long life that he might undo all the mischief done by his predecessor.
I have accepted the crown you have offered me, but only that I may keep it for Prince Darling, who is not dead, as you suppose. The fairy has assured me that there is still hope that you may someday see him again, good and virtuous. Alas, he was led away by flatterers. I knew his heart, and am certain that if it had not been for the bad influence of those who surrounded him, he would have been a good king and a father to his people. I would die gladly if that could bring back our prince to reign justly and worthily once more.
These words went to Prince Darling's heart. He realized the true affection and faithfulness of his old tutor, and for the first time reproached himself for all his evil deeds. Soon the hunters who had caught him took him to a great menagerie where he was kept up among all the other wild beasts. One day, when this keeper was asleep, a tiger broke its chain and flew at him to eat him. Prince Darling, who saw what was going on, wished that he were free.
I would want to save my captor's life.
He had hardly wished this when his iron cage flew open, and he rushed to the side of the keeper and scared the tiger away. He then came and crouched at the feet of the man it had saved. Overcome with gratitude, the keeper stooped to caress the strange creature which had done him such a great service. But suddenly a voice said in his ear,
A good action should never go unrewarded.
At the same instant, the monster disappeared, and the keeper saw at his feet only a pretty little dog. Prince Darling, delighted by the change, frisked about the keeper, showing his joy in every way he could. And the man, taking him up in his arms, carried him to the king, to whom he told the whole story. I would like to have this wonderful little dog. One day, when he was given a little loaf for breakfast, he thought he would like to eat it out in the garden. So he took it up in his mouth and trotted out of the palace. Soon he was in a palace where stood a great house that seemed to be built of gold and precious stones. Numbers of people splendidly dressed were going into it, and sounds of music and dancing and feasting could be heard from the windows. But what seemed very strange was that those people who came out of the house were pale and thin, and their clothes were torn and hanging in rags about them. Prince Darling went up to a young girl who was trying to eat a few blades of grass. She was so hungry. Touched with compassion, he said to himself,
I am very hungry, but I shall not die of starvation before I get my dinner. If I give my breakfast to this poor creature, perhaps I may save her life.
So he laid his piece of bread in the girl's hand and saw her eat it up eagerly. Suddenly there was a great outcry. Turning around, he saw Celia, who was being carried against her will into the great house.
Alas, I am furious with the people who are carrying Celia off. But isn't that exactly what I did myself? And if I had not been prevented, did I not intend to be still more cruel to her?
Just then he was interrupted by a noise above his head. Someone was opening a window. It was an old lady who came forward and threw out a plate of most delicious-looking food. Then the window was shut again. Prince Darling ran forward to eat the food, but the young girl gave a cry of terror and took him up in her arms, saying,
Don't touch it, my poor little dog. That house is the palace of pleasure, and everything that comes out of it is poisoned.
At that moment, a voice said,
You see, a good action always brings its reward.
The prince found himself changed into a beautiful white dove. Rising into the air, he flew towards the house, but it suddenly disappeared from existence. The prince, in despair, determined to search through the world till he found her. He flew on and on for several days, till he came to a great desert where he saw a cavern, and to his delight, there sat Celia, sharing the simple breakfast of an old hermit.
There she is!
Overjoyed to have found her, Prince Darling perched upon her shoulder, trying to express by his caresses how glad he was to see her again. And Celia, surprised and delighted by the tameness of this pretty white dove, stroked it softly. I accept the gift that you make me of yourself, O white dove, and I will love you always.
Take care of what you are saying, Celia. Are you prepared to keep that promise?
Indeed, I hope so, my sweet shepherdess. You promise to love me always. Tell me that you really mean what you said, or I shall have to ask the fairy to give me back the form of the dove which pleased you so much.
You need not be afraid that she will change her mind. Celia has loved you ever since she first saw you. Only she would not tell you while you were so obstinate and arrogant. Now you have repented and mean to be good. You deserve to be happy. And so she may love you as much as she likes.
Prince Darling bowed down in front of the fairy.
Rise, my child, and I will transport you two to the palace, and Darling shall have back again the crown he forfeited by his bad behavior.
While she was speaking, they found themselves in Suleman's hall, and his delight was great at seeing his dear master once more. He gave up the throne joyfully to the prince and remained always the most faithful of his subjects. Celia and Prince Darling reigned for many years. Prince Darling governed his kingdom and his people worthily. The ring never pricked him again and soon disappeared. Because good deeds never go unrewarded.